So, big celebration there for Nayr. Nayr's been teaching English for over 20 years, including in Portugal, Hong Kong, Egypt, and currently in Paris. Her interests include early language learning, bi- and multilingualism, language education, multiple identities, and multiple literacies. So great to have you today, Nayr, and over to you.
Right, good morning. Can you all hear me?
We can hear you, Nayr. If you could just share your screen, share your webcam at the top, the third icon.
Right, is that,
Great, there you go.
Brilliant. So good morning to everybody from Paris. And I'm very pleased to be here with, and participating in this event. Right, and I'm here to talk about the multilingual turn. And so the multilingual turn basically is looking at children as multilingual individuals and not necessarily as only monolingual children or children speaking one language only. So taking all of the language repertoires into account. Unfortunately, we have not actually been in a situation where we actually do take children's multilingual repertoires into account, and that is simply because of the monolingual bias. We have constantly been looking at individuals as monolingual individuals, and we understand them as individuals who can only really function in one language, and that was the separate underlying proficiency, where languages were supposed to function as separate entities in a person's brain. Therefore, the more languages you learned, the more space they took up in your brain. So the idea was, well, you can't actually learn too many languages. It's not good for you. However, research has shown that that actually doesn't function that way. There is a common underlying proficiency, which basically also means that languages can exist and do exist together. And languages are actually interdependent. And individuals are capable of learning multiple languages, and so are children. Now, we are now at a point in time where multilingualism is actually seen as something quite normal. However, it hasn't always been the case, and multilingualism is sometimes seen as being negative. Now, multilingualism is also something that has been around for a very long time, and not just in the last couple of decades due to globalization, technological developments, for example. Let's just have a look at two examples. This is Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, and this is in the 16th century. He actually was speaking about his 4 languages, and he said that he said, I speak Spanish to God, language of spirituality for him, Italian to women, language of love, French to men, language of masculinity, of debating, and German to my horse. Well, I'm not quite sure how to explain that one, but I'll leave that one up to your imagination. But if we actually time-lapse to the 21st century, very much the same thing is happening. And this is a 7-year-old multilingual child at the British Council bilingual section, and she was explaining how she uses her languages. So I speak French to my family and friends, I speak Arabic with my teacher, I speak English with my nanny and in the British Council, and I speak Chinese in school. And I think if you look at the two examples, you can see that they are both, Charles V and the 7-year-old multilingual child, using language with different people in their lives, in different places where these languages need to be used, and for different experiences. So, multilingualism is actually quite a complex and dynamic and multidimensional phenomenon. And I think that's why sometimes people don't quite understand it, because it takes into account all of these elements. It's linguistic, obviously, because you're looking at grammar, vocabulary, phonology, but it's also sociolinguistic, how you use the languages, and then how the brain actually manages all those languages. There is an effective emotional identity aspect to multilingualism. It obviously brings in different cultures. Education has done a lot to actually increase multilingualism. And of course, political. You can learn a language. Sometimes the languages you learn actually depend on the languages that are available, or the languages that the political establishment makes available for you to learn. Now, we're also at a point where children have linguistic rights, and these linguistic rights are actually in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And Article 30 does state that you have the right to practice your own culture, language, and religion, or any you choose. And minority and indigenous groups need special protection of this right. And unfortunately, very often it is the child's mother tongue, which in a particular context is the child's minority language, that is lost. So I think we can safely say, and I do like these descriptions of monolingualism, that it is the illiteracy of the 21st century, the real linguistic deficiency, a figment of the imagination, a myth detached from reality, and a waste of our biological linguistic potential. Now, so what is this multilingual turn? The multilingual turn is more than just accepting the fact that people speak multiple languages and that multiple languages exist in a particular context. It's actually looking at the characteristics of the multilingual individual, and in this case, the multilingual child, and how that child actually functions with her or his 3, 4 languages sometimes. And I like this actually, the statue, and I've used this as an analogy. It's actually a statue called partir, the whole idea of movement, of going somewhere, of traveling, and it's in the Rose Garden in Florence. And if you look through the suitcase, it's obviously in the shape of a suitcase, you can see Florence is nicely contained within a suitcase, but Florence also exists outside of the frame of the suitcase in a harmonious continuum, basically meaning that languages exist in a particular place, but languages also travel. And as humans travel around the world, languages come in contact with each other. So the multilingual turn is also about this contact of languages and how languages actually exist in particular areas and contexts. And today, a lot of cities and even towns are actually becoming quite super diverse. And the whole idea of super diversity is how languages, how many different people from different backgrounds speaking different languages or different cultures actually exist in the same geographical space. I mean, I can just think of Paris as an example where I live. And there's also the idea of transnationalism. That is, individuals don't necessarily have to, there is a lot of mobility, but they don't necessarily have to move physically. Even through technology, you can move physically. I mean, look at this wonderful web conference today. I'm in Paris, and how many people are actually out there watching and attending this conference? So, and if you look at the 2 pictures that I've got on the slide, even children as young as 6, the 2 pictures in our bilingual section, are quite aware and able to actually function in the super diverse world. This little child is English-French bilingual, and we asked him about who he speaks English with and when he speaks English. And he said he speaks English with my grandma and my grandpa, who live in the UK. And when does he speak English? Well, me and my grandpa, this is his picture. He draws his picture of me and my grandpa talking on FaceTime. So this child is actually keeping his language, keeping English going, because obviously English for him in the French context is the minority language. He's actually keeping his English, and he is developing his English by speaking to his grandparents in the UK through FaceTime. That's just fantastic. Multilingualism is actually context dependent. It depends on your particular situation. And these situations could vary from intermarriage, from mobility. There's all types of mobility, obviously, professional mobility, mobility just for pleasure and leisure, like traveling, and then, of course, mobility for political reasons, education. There are quite a lot of different education programs that you can, where you can develop your different languages, and of course you can live in multilingual communities. Now, I'm going to show you some examples of how two 5-year-old twins actually express in drawing their trilingualism and the context and the context-dependent factors in their examples, because what they actually express is that they need to communicate. And the reason why children develop their multilingualism and their multiple languages is because they need to communicate with people in their entourage, so families, relatives, friends, teachers, in places where the languages are used. The child may have one language at home, learning a different language at school, and then maybe a third language in the community, and then also through the experiences they use. So, for example, meal times can be in a particular language, education in another language, and then they go back to the home country or their parents' home country in the holidays, and they use a third language. So let's look at these drawings. These are two drawings from actually two children in my research. They were 5-year-old twins, and the little girl you can see the languages they speak, so Korean, English, and French, and the little girl drew people. So for her, she was actually expressing her link to her languages, to the people she talks to. Her brother, though, used place and experience. And if you look at the drawings, you will see, and the top drawing is the little boy at a school trip in a chateau here, just outside of Paris. The second drawing is about English, but it's more about not the actual English lesson itself, but the commute from his home to the English school, which was actually quite far away. And he remembers having to go to school by car. So it's that experience that he's talking about. And the third one is his experience in Korea. He goes to Korea every holiday in the summer, and the mother puts them in a Korean school for about a month, and they get the Korean experience. But once again, it's not actually Korean itself that the child is mentioning in the picture. It's the experience of going to the canteen with his teacher. So language has so many different connections, and it's not just through grammar and vocabulary, but also through these examples that the two children have given here in these drawings. Now, and this is an example of experience. This is a trilingual French, English, Spanish-speaking 11-year-old. And I asked the children to bring objects. Objects are wonderful ways of getting children to talk about their experiences. And in this case, I asked them to bring objects that represented their different languages. Now, you can imagine my confusion when this little Spanish, English, French-speaking boy brought in an Arab figurine and a camel. I couldn't quite figure out which language these two objects actually connected to. And when I asked him, he said English. And I said, yes, I wonder how that happened. Well, his experience of English was in Dubai. He learned his experience of English and education in general was at an international section in Dubai, international school in Dubai. He learned English at a kindergarten. And so for him, English will be forever associated with Dubai, with the desert, and not with the English words, with the green words of England. So language is, so as that statue, as I was explaining to you earlier on, of the suitcase, language isn't contained in a place. Language moves around. I think it's important that we take that into account, even when we have our children in the classroom, and our children are only learning English. They are actually sitting in that classroom with all their languages, with all their experiences, and with all the different places that they have been to. And sometimes it's just really interesting to actually use these children's experiences to actually be able to talk about their languages, and to also develop different ways of talking about themselves in a particular language, and if, for example, in English, in the English classroom. So when children are actually in the situation, they can be simultaneous bilinguals, meaning that they may have developed their languages from birth or from very early childhood. So I speak two different languages, this 11-year-old said, French and English. I started to pronounce these two languages when I came out of my mum's tummy. That's a really nice way of explaining simultaneous bilingualism. Now, this also means that you could probably consider that these children do not have one mother tongue. And that is also a very difficult question. When you ask a multilingual, what is your mother tongue? They may actually have bilingualism or trilingualism as their mother tongue and not just one language. So we need to take into account children's repertoires and their linguistic trajectories, because some children develop languages and they leave some languages behind, and because they don't basically need them in certain contexts. So they are constantly, these language repertoires are constantly changing as well in children's lives. Otherwise, children can also become consecutive or sequential bilinguals. That is, when children pick up a language in a natural setting, but later, probably after the age of 3, through street, nursery, school, or the community. And here is a little 9-year-old who explained that he lived 3 years in New York when he was 4 years old, and he went to an American school. So he's French, and he picked up English at the age of 4 in an American context, in an American school. So he would be considered a consecutive or sequential bilingual. When children pick up languages in this way, it's a different process because the child already has a language or sometimes 2 languages that they're functioning with. So the learning of a third or a second or a third or a fourth language will depend on the languages they already have. Because we do use our knowledge of language to pick up different languages. Now, when the children are in school in this situation, I think I'll bring this up, Cummings, Bix and Kelp, because it's an important difference to take into account. Children very quickly pick up Bix, basic interpersonal communicative skills, because they want to learn, they want to communicate with people, they want to make friends in the playground. Research says it takes 2 to 3 years to develop Bix and Kelp to a good level. Bix to a good level. Kelp, however, takes longer because it's the academic language of the classroom, the academic language of different subjects, and that does take 5 to 7 years. So we also need to give children time to pick up their languages. It doesn't just happen from one day to the next. People say that children are sponges when they're learning language. Well, yes, but at the same time, not quite. I think we need to remember that language does take time. So children develop different strategies. For example, cross-linguistic transfer or code switching or translanguaging. I don't like to use interference because I don't think languages are interfering. Children are basically using their languages and using the strategies to manage their languages. And children also are very much aware that when they do use different languages at the same time, they're doing it for a purpose and not just simply because the language. And I just like you've read the slide, some examples of how children express this. And I do like the middle one, where the child is actually comparing mixing languages to mixing music. I think that's a lovely analogy. The complementarity principle is just something that Grosjean identified, in that multilinguals will use their languages for different purposes with different people at different times. So your languages, therefore, are never really you never have the same proficiency in your languages. There's always one language that's dominant, and sometimes that language may be dominant in one context becomes less dominant in a different context. So we need to take that into account. That bilingualism and multilingualism shifts between where the proficiency. And multilinguals are also always very much aware that they sometimes have to function in bilingual mode and sometimes in monolingual mode. Meaning, if a child is in a context where 2 or 3 languages are spoken, they will probably be using those 2 or 3 languages with the people around them. However, if a child is in a context where 1 language is used, then they will probably just use that language. They are aware of when to switch between bilingual and monolingual mode. Now, these different strategies of switching between languages, switching between modes, also develop quite enhanced metalinguistic awareness. These, and I just have an example, Victor and Edwin, who are Russian, English, French trilinguals, were trying to explain to me, because I asked them about their languages, and they were trying to explain to me that Russian is an easy language to learn. Now, not being Russian myself and looking at the Cyrillic alphabet, I actually thought, oh my goodness, and how is that? Well, they basically say that what they're doing in this little dialogue is explaining how close the way you speak the language is the way you write the language. So the graphophonemic correspondence is very narrow in Russian. Now, they are comparing the different languages. And at the bottom, Victor goes on to say that Polish, it's kind of Ukrainian with Latin letters. So if you look at the sophistication of these children in actually using their knowledge of the different language to compare languages and to actually decide whether a language is easy or difficult. And I think sometimes we don't use this characteristic that these multilingual children have enough in the classroom, because we always feel that we have to function in one language only. So for them to learn a language, they have to function in that language only. And sometimes this comparison goes a long way to help them actually learn different languages. Yes, it also has been shown that by multilingual learn other languages quicker and better. Now, they, of course, have developed the strategies for learning language. They know how to do it. Therefore, they are not put off, and they are not daunted by the prospect of learning another grammar and another set of vocabulary or another way of spelling things. I think the fact that they function in multiple languages gives them the confidence and the experience to learn other languages. And this little girl was saying that later I will speak French, Persian, English, Chinese, Spanish, and Japanese. So she has no problem with them just learning other languages. The affective factor comes in with the identity, and I think that's quite an important aspect of multilingualism. When you develop these languages, you build a relationship with these languages, and you build an emotional link with these languages. And this little quote in red is actually the Spanish, English, French-speaking boy who brought the Arab figurine and camel of the objects. And he said, if we take off English or French or Spanish, it's like you take off a part of a person, a part of the body. So it's like a physical for him. His languages are part of who he is. Another activity that, besides making children speak or draw their languages, another activity that I found really interesting is the language silhouettes, which you might have heard of. And basically you give the children or the individuals a silhouette and you ask them to draw their languages on this individual, on this outline. And it's really interesting where people draw their languages on the silhouette. And if you look at these examples, these are adults actually. These are not even examples from children's drawings. But the one at the bottom, you can see the heart. So somehow people always go for the heart. They always put some language there in the heart they use the head, and then in this case, she's also got the fingers and the feet, which is basically the different languages that she works with. And English is in the feet, if you see the little butterfly, and that's because she does quite a lot of traveling because of the English language. So that's quite an interesting activity to do with children as well. Now, multilingualism is empowering, and I particularly like this picture of a 13-year-old who basically wrote all her languages, her 5 languages, in the different scripts. And she said that her languages are, it's my power. And if you look at the drawing, she's got the world in her hand. So she believes in her in importance of languages in her future. And this was another activity we did with children called My Languages Project, where children were asked to draw and to talk about the languages. And once again, they had to bring in objects. And this little 5-year-old brought in her book in Gujarati, and she was very proudly showing us that she that she had a different language, and that her mother actually read this book to her at home. So other opportunities, I think, for celebrating multilingualism. I mean, there are all these international days of languages. For example, the International Day of the Mother Tongue was just a couple of days ago, the 21st of February. The European Day of Languages on the 26th of September. And of course, the United Nations actually has International Language Days. And the International Day of English is actually coming up on the 23rd of April. So you might want to do something with children's languages, which includes English. Now, one of the implications for looking at children through the multilingual term, therefore accepting their multilingualism or accepting them as multilingual individuals. Well, for the children, it's basically the fact that it's accepting the fact that they are linguistic geniuses, and we should be working with this genius. For parents, it means that they need to be encouraged to speak their languages to their children and not be told to stop speaking their home languages. For schools should be more open to children's languages. And for society, I think by opening up society to schools, we can create a more just, a more tolerant society, inclusive of diversity, and perhaps a society without walls and without all those executive orders. So, well, that's it for me, for my slides. And thank you for listening. I just wonder if there were any questions. I've basically put my emails on this last slide. And just some links as well to some of the blogs that I've written, or an article as well that I've written on trilingualism. Why did I choose this topic to study? I think for various reasons. One of them was, working with the bilingual children in Paris. I did a survey in 2009 or 10, in which I basically asked them not only to talk about English, but to actually talk about the different languages and how many other languages they actually could also read and write. And I discovered that about 40% of the children in the bilingual section had multiple languages. They were trilingual, they were multilingual, they were learning to read and write all these languages. And my question was, were they comfortable with these languages? Because we always tend to think that children feel very uncomfortable, feel or don't want to actually learn all these languages. And I wanted to know how they felt about the languages. And actually the result is very, very positive. They really like having their languages, and they really like learning to read and write, etc. So yeah, it was based on the work that I do actually. I think translanguaging is, yes, sorry, the question is there a difference between multilingualism and translanguaging? Translanguaging is probably, you could say that translanguaging is probably a strategy that multilinguals use to communicate in a multilingual mode. So, and translanguaging was actually, the term was actually coined in Wales, and it was used to describe the education system in the bilingual education of using both languages in the classroom. So, for example, you could introduce an English text and ask the children to discuss the English text in Welsh, and then ask them to write a summary in English. So it's using both languages in a particular activity. That would be a multilingualism. And then also there's a difference between multilingualism and plurilingualism in the European context. Multilingualism being the use of the existence of many languages in a particular context, and plurilingualism being the individual who speaks multiple languages. Have you answered? Yes. The question is, how can multilingualism help inform government language policy? Well, I think language is not value free. Language is very often used as a tool to include, to exclude people, and by governments to make policy decisions that are not necessarily useful for individuals in society. I think there is a lot happening at an academic level, and I don't think it necessarily always impacts positively on government policy. I think a lot more needs to be done there.
Thank you very much, Nayr, for a fascinating talk. I think we particularly appreciate the way you've woven together both your research and big congratulations on your submitting your thesis yesterday. But you've really woven that together with the practical application of your work with the children in Paris. So I think there's been something for everyone in your talk, both people who are engaged in research in the area and also teachers who work with multilingual children. So a very big thank you to you from all of us in the YLTSIG committee. Thank you. You can also join Nayr in Glasgow at our PCE on the 3rd of April, where she'll be giving a workshop on the theme of values education, along with her co-facilitator, Gail Ellis. So we do hope you'll have that chance to attend Nayr's workshop in Glasgow. Thank you very much again, Nayr.
Thank you.